evidence, by all means, share it with us in the Q&A. And you still have this north versus south divide. Obviously, Germany is okay, but Spain is U.S. Depression era type unemployment. Italy's not good either. I don't have some others, but the point is that it's not so good. Okay, so now let's move from the G, whatever, the G8, the G12, the G20, to two of the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, which of course have been growing much faster. But there's a slowdown there too. The central banks are raising rates to combat inflation. Until yesterday, India lowered their interest rate. I knew somebody would say it, yes, it's okay. But it does not disprove the point being made that the interest rates are high because there is inflation. There are structural problems, but it's inevitable that you would have structural problems in rapidly growing emerging economies. You had them in Japan 30 years ago, 35 years ago. It's not a bad thing, it's just an indicator that these economies of these two giants are growing very rapidly and they're growing pains. At least to me that's not a negative thing. But the tight macroeconomic policies combined with the fact that the traditional customers are ailing is not a healthy sign here. So the 7.5% growth rate the World Bank predicted for India is not different at all from what China has announced as their forecast for their growth rate next year. It's around 7.5, 8, which is a healthy growth rate. But where is China going to go? Will they have a bumpy landing with ups and downs? It's certainly possible. Or will they have a hard landing where growth will be less than 6%? Of course, for a country like that, growth of less than 6% becomes an issue. There's an issue of not enough energy being generated. So one prescription, which we'll come back to, is to shift to consumer demand rather than heavy industrial investment. And certainly China and even India are ready for that at this point in time. So there's a slowdown in both countries. High oil prices are as harmful in India as they are in the United States or Japan or Europe. And thanks partly to unintelligent Indian government policies, the industrial investment is disappointing and the inflation is high because it's high, it hurts corporate borrowing because you have high government borrowing which crowds out the private sector borrowers whenever that occurs. So this is also not a particularly healthy thing to have happen. And fixed capital formation in India certainly has plunged. China is also slowing down, but I would say that the problem in China is as much political as it is economic. We can go into that later. Now I'm going to go back a few years to some things I said right after the stock market crash in 2008 when I talked about the global marketing paradigm shift. We had, at that point in time, people, the affluent, were being very careful about conspicuous consumption, at least in the United States, because there was this feeling that too many people were suffering and you don't want to flaunt it. So that was called austerity marketing, and I looked at the situation and came up with the concept of indulgent parsimony, which means you appeal to your customer base by giving them something which is both affordable, makes their hearts sing, and is good value. And indeed, you have some iconic examples there of the type of consumer product, at least, that that indulgent parsimony would appeal to successfully. I know you're going to say Starbucks is too expensive, but it's really quite affordable. Now here you have another example that I gave back then of indulgent parsimony. You're not going to buy the Hermes bag, you're not even going to buy the Coach bag, unless you're very, one of the people who has the money and can buy really expensive things and do it quietly. But you will buy what Target has to offer. And Target, as it turned out, was quite successful with this indulgent parsimony strategy, even though they didn't call it that. Now, you have something that's been added to that. You had consumer fatigue going on with people who may have the money, but are so afraid. Fear, as you know, is enervating. So when you are afraid to spend the money you have, you end up with consumer fatigue. But what has started to happen, in the United States at least, is what is called comfort marketing. And I've seen examples of it in Japan as well. With comfort